Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Welcome to the Performance Matters podcast from GP Strategies, your talent transformation partner. In each episode, we'll interview industry experts and explore best practices and innovative insights to help your organization improve performance.
Greetings to all the Performance Matters listeners around the globe. I'm your host, Michael Thiel. Today on the show, we're talking about how organizations can get a leg up on the future by embracing the idea of strategic enterprise skilling. We'll discuss what this means in the first place, why your organization should be hyper-focused on adopting an enterprise skilling approach, and we'll add further value by sharing best practices, as well as things to avoid. We've assembled three heavy hitters across the GP Strategies Performance and Learning Consulting universe to share their insights. I'm pleased to be joined in the virtual studio by none other than Senior Learning Consultant Peggy Durbin, Business Consulting Practice Lead Chris Davis, and Chief Learning and Innovation Officer Matt Donovan. Now, if I asked each to list their career bios, well, I'm looking at my clock here. We'd be out of time. So here's the Cliff's Notes. For almost 30 years, Peggy Durbin has been involved in the performance consulting practice and across multiple industries, conducting design thinking workshops, developing learner experience playbooks, and formulating measurement strategies.
Thank you, Michael. It's nice to be with you.
This is awesome. I'll get you your first time pin here a little bit later. And thanks for bearing with us. I understand your back's hurting a little bit, but you're a real trooper joining us today.
All good. The body may be weak, but the mind is strong.
Exactly. Okay. Now on the flip side, I think as maybe like a 6-time guest on the show, Business Consulting Practice Lead Chris Davis has not only earned his Performance Matters Blue Velour smoking jacket, but he has parlayed his skills as a naval nuclear submarine engineer into a 20-plus year career as a performance consultant, helping organizations around the globe gain a clearer picture of how to define performance in measurable terms and how to tailor a learning approach to get there. Chris, welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Michael. It's always good to join you.
Well, we're honored to have you here. Now, you two are not alone, all right? We have a third guest. He is a globally respected thought leader, one who describes himself as a slayer of shiny objects, a recovering instructional designer, an advocate for the learner, and a warrior for relevance. We are talking about GP Strategies' very own Chief Learning and Innovation Officer. Please welcome back to the show, Mr. Matt Donovan. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, glad to be back. And of course, I'm really happy to be on here with this great company. So I think that's the best thing is to surround myself with brilliant people. So looking forward to this.
We've got a pretty hard-hitting topic here. Again, we're talking strategic enterprise skilling. As someone who doesn't really hide from the fact that I'm often not the smartest person in the room, I want to level set this topic here and just ask, I'm going to say a potentially silly question, but what exactly do you mean by an enterprise skilling strategy?
I'll start off here a little bit and then hopefully everybody will kind of jump in with this. But I think it's an interesting thing. When we talk about an enterprise skilling strategy, first of all, it's enterprise. What we're looking at is how it's going to help the organization achieve its strategic outcomes. So as it looks at having the right workforce with the right skills and the right position to achieve the goals of the organization, that's really what an enterprise skilling initiative is about. But the fact that ambiguous, you might not know what it is, that's not an uncommon at our pace because we've been doing skilling initiatives for a very long time. And so skilling is one of those terms that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But really for us, when we're talking about it, is thinking about from a strategic workforce enablement standpoint, how do you really come up with a skilling architecture that's going to help quickly move a workforce from point A to point B, an increasingly volatile and disrupted space that we're all competing in. So that's really at a high level what that is. So how can you get that global coordination around skilling while still also being very focused in the needs of a function or a unit within a group or a region or a product area, whatever that may be, to be able to still respond to the local needs with that. But that's kind of that enterprise and that skilling stroke and a big piece of how I would describe that. But Peggy, Chris, anything you'd add in? Feel free to challenge me on that as well.
So think about it as a spider web. and all the strands come out, and it's skill. And think about a kid on a soccer team. It takes certain skills to play the game. And the thing that I would say, bring to the table when we talk about skills with our clients is the end game. It's the work output. And if you take that soccer analogy, it's the goal, and winning the game. So bringing that work output along with the skills that it takes to do a job. And I would say also the relationships between those skills. The same, let's say, running skills for soccer would be the same running skills that you need for football. Although with soccer, you got to have speed, but you also have to be able to dribble the ball down the court with basketball, or I think they still even say dribble in soccer, but but pass the ball. So you can use that analogy.
I was just going to add to what Peggy was saying, the big distinction about how we are looking at this is skills in the context of the work that has to be performed. Peggy's analogy of, we can talk about, are you a good runner? So my son never played soccer in his life, played lacrosse. Got it. He can run well playing lacrosse. He's fast. Got it. He would be fast on a soccer field, but he doesn't know how to run and dribble at the same time. The environment of a soccer player versus a lacrosse player are two different things with the same skill called running. What the enterprise skilling strategy does is it really starts to dig into what are those collection of skills that we need and how are they differentiated by the work that has to be performed. And then how do we connect people to that so that they can move in and out and throughout the organization by building or acquiring the skills they need to do this job or the next job or the next job.
Okay, so I think I'm starting to get it here. So let me just put this into a really nebulous work scenario here. Give me a few examples of just skills. Let's say if you were working at a instructional design company, something like that. So what would be some things that are skills? Like compare that to a traditional approach.
You could do top down discussions about skills, or you can do bottom up. And if we think about the work output of an instructional designer, in that case, it would be being able to conduct a learning needs assessment. So in order to do that work, what does it take? Well, it takes the skills and the understanding of adult learning, that perspective. It's being able to break down what it would take to do whatever job I was analyzing. It requires looking at the audience too, and the audience of my learners, and saying, well, what type of learners are these? So critical thinking, being able to possibly interview. So you could see how you can talk about skills in terms of competencies and communication and critical thinking, those types of things. Or you can take the bottom up approach, I would say. I don't know, maybe Chris or Matt would argue with me about that, but I think that you can approach it, I would say, in either direction.
I think organizations, historically speaking, get very tied to the notion of a competency. And competencies have been sort of the basis of the HR employee model, capability model for a long, long time. And to Peggy's point, those competencies can be things like critical thinking, or it could be program management, project management. Well, okay, for the purposes of hiring, that's a great framework to use. For the purposes of deciding if Chris, who has a lot of experience as a project manager on a construction company, right? I know how to manage workflow. I can manage tasks. I can do all of that. Can I translate that into a role of being a project manager in a regulated pharmaceutical environment where there's a whole different context about what a project manager has to be able to do, what skill has to be applied to be successful in that environment? So it creates clarity where there probably was ambiguity about what really will enable someone to be successful.
Okay. I think I'm really getting this from hearing from all of you is that really the purpose here is being able to look at the potential of someone, being able to predict, will they be successful? Maybe even showing where they have gaps, adding some clarity in there, both from an individual perspective, but a organizational perspective, looking at their talent. Is that kind of fair? I know fifth grader probably wouldn't even understand that part, but that's what I'm kind of feeling. Am I tracking with you on a basic level set?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Michael. You got it.
Okay, well, good. Well, then I feel like I'm qualified to move on at this point. So from your various perspectives, what's the current skilling landscape look like across organizations? So, in other words, what are you all seeing in terms of where people are at in terms of grasping this concept?
There's a couple of things that are coming off. First off, we see that the world is becoming much more disruptive. In the past 5 years, we've had two global disruptions that we've seen come out, whether it's the pandemic to start off with, followed by AI, and we're going to continue to see more changes. Even if what we look at, laying out here, even in the US, the landscape of what we're expecting the companies to be able to do and evolve in the new economic structure, I think it's going to be continued disruption and change. So one is the volatility is increasing to be that. So having a more agile structure to be able to have the ability to move the workforce more consistently, more effectively, generate more visibility with that. I will also say at the same time, we've been doing skilling work for a long time, and I think a lot of people are frustrated. They feel it's absolutely important, but they don't feel they're getting the return on the investment that they're putting out of there. They're not getting the proverbial juice for the squeeze in the activities that they're doing. And so, even with the advent of like, hey, we can bring in a taxonomy now and look at the lift of like 30,000 skills in a skills taxonomy that we could just load in. Sounds like you have a lot, but when it really gets to being able to enable someone to do the work, in the actual performance context, it's still a long distance from being able to say I can match skills to content to be able to say skills to content to context to be able to do work and be productive. And so I think there's a question of like we feel that organizations feel it's very important, but they also don't feel that there's a good way to get it done. So I think they're really looking for being able to do it. And that was kind of part of the impetus for some of that research we were doing around what were the 9 pain points that our customers are really seeing with that and across the skilling initiatives. And so we work with a lot of very large organizations that are in the midst of this, either starting it or have paused it or in progress, and asking them, what are the drivers behind that? So some of those were the key pain points that they're having as to we need to get more out of this.
The two disruptions that Matt just talked about are top of mind for most everybody. The third, whether it's a disruption or it's just the environment we're in right now, is the idea that there is a war for talent across organizations. For some reason, organizations have difficulty finding talent to fit into the work that they have. Matt was talking about the ability to move people in and through and around an organization is critical because the mindset of the younger generation that's coming into the workforce is one where their definition of a career path is different than what our definition of a career path was back in the day, right? And so they're constantly wanting to be able to move to the next thing, move to the next experience in terms of the work that they're doing. And so for organizations to be able to retain their talent, they, one, have to have visibility into what skills are needed to do the work that we have to do, not just what skill is needed for a project manager or an instructional designer or financial, and then figure out how can we match those with the people we have, and then how do we close the gaps for folks that want to try something, want to give them that opportunity to shift the work that they're doing, but we've got to enable them than we had before. And that's why this concept is becoming so much more heightened, I think. So the younger generation in the workforce, their concept of a career path is completely different than the way we grew up thinking about a career path. You came in as a financial analyst, and your goal was to progress through the levels and the roles within the financial space. And I think today that's not necessarily the case. They're looking for the different work experiences. And so in order for them to not leave an organization to go find that elsewhere, the company has to be able to clearly understand what skills are needed to do each of the jobs that they have to produce the outcomes that they're seeking, so that you start matching people to that or upskilling people to that to give them this totally different career experience in this new world.
And I'm going to tag on to that too, Chris, because you bring up the ability to see across an organization what's available. How do I get there? And the importance of thinking about skilling, enterprise skilling specifically, in the complete talent life cycle for an organization. And that means that the enterprise skilling strategy needs to be inclusive of HR, your traditional HR roles, and your learning and design, as well as the business executives who are setting the goals for the company. I mean, everybody has to be talking and speaking the same language, has to buy in to this enterprise strategy and think about it in that talent life cycle to support all aspects of a career path.
So, I guess the big question is you three have identified some really interesting things. First of all, Matt, you brought up the higher level that we've gone through some significant disruptions here that is really putting a spotlight on this pain point and this need to really get skilling right. Chris, you're mentioning this massive war we're having for talent, both in keeping talent, but also helping talent actually see a way forward in a clear way that we can retain them. And Peggy, I think you're kind of hitting on one of the questions I had is kind of what do we do about this? So, what do we need to do about skilling, thinking differently about it? Since that's what we're really talking about today, are best practices to getting this right.
Well, I think it definitely does involve pulling the right people together to have the conversation around what are we trying to achieve as an organization? What does our workforce look like? And we've been telling our clients it's the type of thing that you can't just dive into and do it all. It really is something that is best served by starting with either a specific part of the business, perhaps a part of the business that is struggling with retaining talent or hiring into the specific roles. Matt, what are some other examples that we've been talking about of places where people can start?
One of the things that we talk about is to get away from one of the big failure points is starting with a boil the ocean strategy. I mean, one of the work problems is that people want to go in and do an enterprise skilling strategy. So we got to do all the skills across all the organization. It's not realistic to be able to do that. But more importantly, if you can actually either horizontally or vertically focus in on an area, build some success around that. The core thing is that you have to build a global foundation, which is a shared vocabulary. When I say skill and L&D, it's the same thing the HR folks are saying, the same thing that the business unit is saying. So a shared vocabulary is the first start with that. Then also the expectations and the outputs from that infrastructure as well, so that the business unit, when they need this, it's going to meet their needs. What does the skilling architecture mean and deliver for them? Same for HR and the same for L&D. Those are the foundational components. But instead of trying to apply that foundation to the entire org, go in and pick a role that needs upskilling. So, with the advent of AI coming in, it's going to change the way that people are doing work. So, if I pick in the marketing function inside of an organization, AI presents an opportunity to really scale a marketer's expertise in ways that it hasn't been able to do before. But you have to rethink the way the work has gotten done. You're not just layering over AI on top of the way we used to do it yesterday. We're actually talking about how do you really rethink that human plus AI relationship in the work. So, how will AI help you automate? How will it help you generate? How will it help you predict or drive analysis out of data sets we haven't seen before? So bringing that in, starting to use that AI not only as a tool, but as a peer or a teammate, or in some cases, a manager for overseeing some work elements we have. So really taking that step back in that role vertical to rethink, for example, if I'm going to upskill, it's not just saying that the humans need to do the things we did yesterday, but work with a tool differently. You're going to do the work differently. And what we then look at is how do the humans need to become the humans they're at. So I think that's focus in an area, build out some success with that, and find that. So I think those are some low hanging fruit of where we do that, that kind of avoids some of the bigger pitfalls we've seen in the past.
I love what you're talking about here, Matt. What I'm curious about, and I'm sure my listeners here, our listeners rather, would want to know are some very specific examples of how this skilling strategy could look and come to play. So, who wants to volunteer an example here?
I'll take that one, Michael. So, if you think about during the pandemic, I know we hate going back there, but it highlighted the need in this example. During the pandemic, there was a shortage of nurses. Not only were ERs being inundated, there were so many patients, but nurses were burned out. They were fearful of their own lives as well as their families. So we lost nurses during this time. And you think about that, with such a concentrated labor pool, it was hard to get new nurses because it takes 4 years. It takes time to get new nurses. They've got to go through the educational process and graduate, right? So the question came about, well, how do we address that increased demand and yet still have the constraints of our labor? And then they thought about, well, okay, you think about the various skills and the various tasks that nurses do on any given shift. Everything from taking vitals to diagnosing, helping to diagnose, helping to change IVs, all of these different things, monitoring patients as well. So then you think about which of those tasks require a nursing degree. There may be other people in the hospital who may not have a nursing degree, but can certainly help out and do some of those skills, such as taking vitals and monitoring patients. So they started looking at other roles within the hospital to see how some of those tasks could be filled by other people to free up the nurses to do the skills that do require the nursing degree. So that's a perfect example, because if you have an enterprise skilling structure in place, you have people associated with these different skills, and you can look across your organization and say, okay, who has this specific skill set?
That's a great example. That almost feels like a parallel to where we might be going with generative AI too, right? Where there's certain things that is just easier, more efficient for AI to multiply the high skill of a practitioner, let's say in instructional design or something like that. Any other examples? I'm just curious. That one really got me kind of excited. Any other that you all are thinking about or hearing about?
You start talking about AI in the workflow, and Matt alluded to this earlier. And if you think about call center agents and where they can be heading, when you look at call center agents, generally take a long time to upskill into the role effectively, right? They have a lot of learning, a lot of practice that has to go on. And perhaps as AI comes into this and it's part of their workflow, maybe what AI can do for them, and then I was talking about, you don't think about AI as just an overlay to the way they used to do it. It becomes now, in the same sense that Peggy was just talking about, AI takes on certain elements of the tasks that the call center agent used to do, and now you don't have to train them up on that. So, for example, an irate customer calls in, and one of the classic things that call center agents are generally trained on, and it takes a while to get good at, is the ability to de-escalate. One, they're agitated. Two, to not say things that will continue to agitate them without giving away the farm for whatever it is that they're responding to. And so AI has the ability to sort of hear and read the tone and tenor of the caller, understand the level of agitation, and then bring up suggestions that the call center agent can now do to help de-escalate this. So you need them to recognize this. You just have to skill them to be able to respond to the prompts in a way that's meaningful for the client interaction. That's an example that kind of brings those two things together.
So I also want to just mention to our listeners that both Chris, Peggy, and Matt are active contributors to the GP Strategies thought leadership blogs out there. And in preparation for this discussion over the past month, I've been reading some of your work. So maybe I'll ask for an autograph later after we're done. But one of the things I wanted to bring up here that really caught my eye was one of the recommendations, Peggy and Matt, in your recent blog, was this idea that we need to really rethink how we structure skills into an ontology versus a taxonomy. I'd love it if you talk a little bit more about that and maybe break down the differences.
Sure. The more traditional approach is that taxonomy, which is a hierarchical approach to skills. In fact, they usually start off with a competency at the top, and it kind of trickles down where you get deeper and more fine-tuned with skills and lower level skills. That is a very structured approach to skills. The ontology approach is, think of it more as a network of skills and how they relate to one another. It shows relationships between skills. So you have, I think, an easier time looking across an organization. And to Chris's point earlier, where do I need people to fill these skills? And or where do I want to go as an employee? And what skills do I need to get to that next position that I want to go to? So I don't know, Matt, Do you want to add on to that?
I think a couple of things. One is that it's an and conversation. I think that a taxonomy and an ontology are important, but it's the falsehood is to stop with a taxonomy and say it's good enough. To your point, a taxonomy is often very hierarchical, top to bottom. It's very fixed, it's very rigid. And when it starts to get messy is when people trim it back to a nice, neat connections around it. So what happens is taxonomies often suffer what I call overgeneralization. The idea is to be able to kind of pull a taxonomy that applies to a lot of things. So if I talk about project management, I can bring the skills from project management in a taxonomy that will apply to any project manager in the organization. But we do know that there is a difference between a project manager in the role of launching a brand plan or brand initiative, or a manager of an initiative that's launching a clinical trial. There are skills that overlap that we would call project management skills, but there are other things in the way in which they do the work which are very different, down to even what we would call the secret sauce of success in that role that's done by those. So those things are so unique, they tend to blow up this very nice, neat structure of a taxonomy because some of these things don't match. And so we start to hang them off. It's hard to say, now my taxonomy gets really hard to apply to everybody, it gets fractured. An ontology gives you a way to be able to not only have highly structured data, but semi-structured, or I can attach things that don't match other things, and it can actually not only create space to add those things that make it messier, but it also shows relationships between the nodes, not just a top to bottom. It allows you to add multiple dimensions to that. So a taxonomy within, let's say, I need skills like data analytics. It may show a set of skills, but it's not going to show the relationship over into like mastering Excel or the skills associated with launching a brand plan, which may actually have a relationship between Excel and advanced analytics skills tie into the work function you're doing. There's a relationship there that is important to understand. In a taxonomy, you don't really have the capacity to do this. What it does is it gives you a way to be able to organize the world, provide valuable specificity, which help ensure that we can actually promote productivity. So it's not just skills to be generalized, but it's skills to be applied. And that's where the ontology helps with you do that. And then when you want to go and move a population, those relationships can help identify populations that may have unique skill sets, and it's easier to pivot them here because I'm up related skills that can help you with that. So it helps with agility, it helps with the specificity that matters and is valuable. And it also, in our certain case, gives room for capacity to bring in measurement as well. Elements of measurement and how is it, that's one dimension of how is the actual work evaluated, assessed, measured to be completed. That is a dimension that's not often in taxonomies.
That's great from both of you. I mean, I'm hearing and I'm visualizing this, Peggy, is this idea that you mentioned an ontology is more that interconnected spider web type concept, where a taxonomy is very narrow. It's very vertical in that way. And I could see, Chris, when you were mentioning earlier that pain point of the younger generation, they want to see their path forward. They want to see what they need to do to get somewhere else. And they often want to see that in a dashboard or something like that. That's DIY. So kind of what I'm hearing from you is that you would need more of that ontology base to enable the visualization and measurement. Is that fair to say? Am I kind of seeing it all come together here?
It is having that visibility into the different skills in order to determine where I want to go. And the important thing here is that interconnectedness between L&D, the learning organization, and HR, because HR has got a sense of the roles that are open within an organization, but L&D brings the content and the learning experiences to close the skill gaps in order for me to get to that next role where I want to go. So that's why it's even more so important now for L&D and HR to be on the same track.
I can see as performance practice leads, that's something that Chris, you and Peggy, you're helping marshal all these resources in terms of your core role. So it's exciting for me as someone who's more on the instructional design side to see all the different levers come together in terms of the value proposition of GP strategies. So thinking about taking some of these baby steps forward here, what would you three say are some of the key things organizations can do to get back on the right track or even just get on the right track in the first place?
I think some of the things that we often advocate is, first of all, starting off with a shared vocabulary. In the organization, when we say skill, this is what we mean across the organization. That's probably one of the easiest places to say. The second part is when we're talking about we're going to build something that allows us to be able to use skills to help meet a range of needs, recruit, ensure drive mastery, retain, help people do career mobility, all of those things, we're going to use it. We want to make sure that the utility for each of the stakeholders is built into what we're going to do at the end. When you're trying to go out and apply this, don't try and boil the ocean. Pick like a couple of skills across the organization you want to build, or in a vertical, looking at a role and enablement strategy, focus on one or two key roles and build those out. And then build off of those wins. You will get better as an organization at doing this. And the more you do it, you'll refine your practice, you'll get better. And as you go to apply it to other areas, you will pick up speed in being able to do that. And over time, you will actually start to fill in, but starting off those priority areas to be able to do that. I think those are probably some of the key starting points. Peggy, you have a couple?
I've heard you say this to a couple clients too when we've been talking about skilling initiatives, but be an advocate for all stakeholders of your skilling strategy. It's L&D, HR, but also the employee.
Is really meeting all of those needs. And that has to be, and I think it's a really good one, Peggy.
Chris, what about you? Do you have a take?
My biggest thing is don't not start because you're dismayed. There are times where we want to start something. It seems like this very difficult, daunting task. So don't let that stop you from starting in one of the places that Matt articulated. Start with a common language. Start with an understanding from the various stakeholders in the business about what are they seeing as challenges caused by misaligned skills, people leaving the organization because they don't see a path forward with their skills that they have. Those are places that organizations can begin to start. And then don't be afraid to ask for help. An organization to come in and guide you in this process. And know that it's not an overnight thing. It should never be imagined that you're going to solve this opportunity overnight.
Well, that's very reassuring. And I love where you're saying is sometimes it's just starting with what are the pain points? What are we experiencing that is the justification for wanting to go through and work together and figure out the shared vocabulary? And to lead this in, because I know you all three have been very generous with your time. So, my last question I had for you is where can our listeners learn more about our approach to skilling at GP Strategy? What are some next steps?
So if you have questions and want to learn more about it, certainly if you go to our Performance Matters website, we have a lot of thought leadership pieces out there that can help ground you in the thinking and the approach. Build your base of understanding. Let that be the start of how you're thinking about this for your organization. Then second, from there, our contact information is all on that site. And if you have even a question about what it's saying or you want to talk to somebody about it, don't hesitate to reach out. It's all right there.
gpstrategies.com. And a little plug here on the home site, GP Strategies. If you go up to the very top left, we have a very robust resources section with plenty of thought leadership articles featuring outstanding contributors like Peggy Durbin, Matt Donovan, Chris Davis. Don't be shy, dive on in. So on behalf of our many listeners around the globe, Matt, Peggy, and Chris, thank you for joining us today for this very interesting conversation about strategic skilling. Thank you very much.
The Performance Matters podcast is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get podcasts or listen on our website at gpstrategies.com.